In the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains, where mist clings to ancient stones and echoes carry the weight of centuries, stands a castle that witnessed horrors few could imagine. For 3 decades, young peasant girls crossed its threshold, seeking employment in noble households, only to vanish into legend and terror. The mistress of this fortress, protected by the rigid laws of feudal Hungary, became a figure whose very name would become synonymous with cruelty. This is the story of Countess Elizabeth Báthory, born in 1560 into one of Hungary's most powerful families, and of the legal and social structures that allowed her to commit acts of unimaginable cruelty. Elizabeth's world was shaped by a society in which the feudal hierarchy granted nobles extraordinary authority. Serfs were effectively property, subject to the whims of those who owned the land. The laws of the time did little to protect the vulnerable. They existed instead to maintain social order, which often meant preserving the rights of those with power above all else. Elizabeth, intelligent and educated, was uniquely positioned to exploit this system. Fluent in Hungarian, Latin, German and Greek, she understood not only the privileges her class afforded, but the loopholes that insulated her from accountability. Her early years coincided with a tumultuous period in Hungarian history. The kingdom, fractured after the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, had been divided among Ottoman control, Habsburg influence, and semi-independent Transylvania. This fragmentation weakened centralized authority and empowered local nobility, effectively giving them near-total autonomy. Elizabeth's family, the Bey dynasty, had produced kings and generals who fought Ottoman expansion and commanded private armies. Born at the family seat in Narabal, she grew up in a world where wealth, military might and influence were inseparable from identity and social survival. At 11, Elizabeth was engaged to Ferenc Nadasdy, uniting 2 of Hungary's greatest fortunes in a political marriage. Ferenc, a celebrated military figure known for his campaigns against the Turks, was often absent, leaving Elizabeth in charge of vast estates. Married at 15, she became the de facto ruler of their lands, overseeing complex finances, administering justice, and managing a household that employed hundreds. Yet beneath the outward appearance of competence lay disturbing patterns that would later define her legacy. The rural landscape around her estates was harsh. Poverty, the aftermath of Turkish raids, and the rigid feudal system left families desperate. Young girls often entered noble households as servants, seeking survival in exchange for labor. This created a steady supply of vulnerable victims for those willing to exploit the system. Combined with religious tension, Hungary was divided between Catholics and Protestants. The social fabric was fractured, creating an environment in which cruelty could fester unchecked. It was during these early years of autonomy that whispers about Elizabeth's treatment of young female servants began to circulate. Girls entered her service and never returned home. Deaths were explained as accidents, disease, or wartime misfortune. Local priests noted the growing number of graves near noble estates, yet intervention was rare. The law that should have shielded the innocent instead protected Elizabeth, and the social system enabled a predator who knew precisely how far her immunity extended. The death of Ferenc Nadasdy in 1604 removed the last restraint on her behavior. As a widow, Elizabeth possessed unprecedented independence. Castle Chakich, perched atop a limestone cliff overlooking the Carpathians, became her primary residence. Its isolation made it an ideal environment for unchecked activity. Contemporary accounts describe the fortress as a place of dread, where parents warned their daughters never to enter. Poverty and desperation, however, often outweighed caution, feeding the Countess's grim enterprise. Testimonies collected decades later describe torture chambers equipped with iron implements, chains and spikes, rooms designed to inflict maximum suffering. Victims were stripped, doused with water, and left to freeze, or confined in cages designed to maximize pain. Heated tools were applied to sensitive areas, flesh torn with specially designed pincers, and victims forced to endure agony while conscious. Witnesses described bite marks, suggesting acts of symbolic cannibalism. Survivors recounted how the Countess watched with the detached curiosity of a natural philosopher, observing human suffering as an experiment. Victims were typically young girls, often between 10 and 16, orphans, daughters of widows, or children from distant villages. Lured by the promise of work, they found themselves trapped in a fortress designed to prevent escape. Loyal retainers ensured that any attempt to flee was met with brutal punishment, and the system of complicity extended beyond the castle walls. Procurers, servants, and even minor nobles participated in transporting and controlling victims, forming a network that operated under the protection of feudal privilege. The infamous stories of bloodbathing, for which Elizabeth earned the moniker Blood Countess, remain controversial. Some accounts suggest she believed bathing in the blood of virgins would preserve her youth. Others argue these tales were politically motivated exaggerations. Nonetheless, contemporary evidence confirms that blood played a role in her rituals, whether applied to her skin or consumed in small amounts. Over time, her methods evolved, escalating from minor beatings to complex, prolonged torture sessions that involved multiple victims simultaneously. The scale of these crimes grew alongside her audacity. Court documents, witness testimonies, and contemporary letters reveal the systematic nature of these acts. Surviving victims, such as Katerina Banica, provide haunting accounts of imprisonment, forced observation of others' torture, and near-impossible escapes. Families who sought justice faced enormous risks, as accusations against nobility could lead to punishment or death. Local officials often bribed or intimidated, frequently concealed evidence. Records show falsified death certificates, payments for lime to dissolve bodies, and careful manipulation of legal procedures to ensure the Countess remained untouched by law. The political context of her downfall is equally telling. By 1610, Elizabeth had become immensely wealthy, and her power posed challenges to both the Habsburg monarchy and Hungarian nobles. King Matthias II commissioned an investigation, largely motivated by financial and political concerns. Palatine Georg Thurzo, despite familial ties to Elizabeth, led a raid on Castle Chakich. The discovery of living and dead victims, along with torture implements, forced public recognition of her crimes. Yet even then, noble privilege protected Elizabeth. She was never formally tried. Her accomplices, all commoners, were executed, tortured or imprisoned, while she was confined to her castle until her death in 1614. The aftermath highlights the intertwining of law, privilege and politics. Her estate remained intact, her children retained inheritance and titles, and legal debates raged over whether noble immunity could shield such crimes. The case influenced subsequent jurisprudence, establishing boundaries of noble power, but stopping short of full accountability. It also inspired European pamphlets, horror literature, and legends that gradually transformed Elizabeth into a mythical figure, a vampire-like embodiment of evil. The legacy of Elizabeth Báthory is multifaceted. Her story illustrates the dangers of absolute power, the failures of legal systems to protect the vulnerable, and the role of social hierarchy in enabling systematic abuse. It reveals how ordinary individuals can be complicit, from servants coerced into participation to officials who prioritize social order over justice. Her legend demonstrates how societies process trauma, transforming human cruelty into monstrous mythology, thereby distancing the public from the systemic conditions that allowed it. 4 centuries later, the questions raised by her crimes remain hauntingly relevant. How does society balance individual rights with collective power? When does privilege become impunity? How do social systems create victims and enable perpetrators? The Countess's victims, mostly young girls whose names have been lost to history, paid the ultimate price, not solely due to personal evil, but because of a society that deemed them expendable. Their suffering stands as a stark reminder that unchecked power, when codified and protected by law, can result in atrocities that transcend time. The psychological and cultural fascination with Elizabeth continues. Scholars debate her motives, exploring possibilities ranging from sadistic personality disorder to psychopathy shaped by social environment. Feminist perspectives question whether her crimes were sensationalized due to her gender, while Gothic and vampire literature have transformed her into an archetypal figure of terror. Sites connected to her life, including Castle Chakich, are now tourist destinations, raising ethical questions about commercializing tragedy while offering educational opportunities. Her story also serves as a cautionary tale about complicity. Communities allowed cruelty to persist, officials turned blind eyes, and the mechanisms of justice were subverted by privilege. Each generation has reinterpreted Elizabeth's narrative, reflecting contemporary anxieties about power, morality, and the human capacity for cruelty. Yet beneath myth and legend lies a historical reality, a system that empowered one woman to commit decades of abuse, shielded by law, social hierarchy, and political expediency. Elizabeth Báthory's life and alleged crimes demonstrate the complex interplay of individual pathology and systemic failure. The conditions that allowed her alleged decades-long spree were not accidental. They were embedded in the social, legal, and political structures of feudal Hungary. Her story forces a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about how societies define justice, privilege, and human worth. It shows that when law and custom protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable, extraordinary cruelty becomes possible. Even as her castle fell into ruin, and the immediate reign of terror ended, the echoes of her crimes persisted. Stories of tortured girls, suppressed justice, and the complicity of a system designed to protect the elite provide lessons that resonate today. Whether examining historical feudal systems, contemporary abuses of power, or the societal mechanisms that allow exploitation to flourish, the Countess's story offers insight into how structures of authority can fail those they are meant to protect. Subscribe now and uncover the dark secrets history tried to hide.